Hello everyone. Thank you very much for waiting to the end. More by luck than judgment, I think, we've managed not to completely say the same thing 3 times. I hope I don't. Certainly the previous 2 managed to avoid it, so hopefully I will manage to avoid it too. I'm going to talk about negotiating cloud contracts, and what we're going to quickly look at where we are now, and I think this has been a theme throughout this discussion, is basically cloud contracts as a technology contract. There is very little new under the sun. But also I want to talk about way the market is evolving. It's maturing really fast. So sort of say this is what best practices is, which is what I'm supposed to be talking about, is slightly nonsense because best practice is changing so rapidly at the moment in this area. And it is being informed, however, by best practice in traditional sourcing deals. So we can talk about that and what's happening next, and then some best practice thoughts. So this session is called Negotiating Contracts in the Cloud. I think basically we're not negotiating them. I think that chaps like Mimecast have been doing it for 12 years. Cloud-based services probably are negotiating because they're a mature business, but most cloud contracts, most cloud services aren't negotiated. As we've discussed, they've just been clicked on. The point of cloud services, as I think Steve put it quite nicely, is it's just not practical to negotiate them, bespoke them each time. It's not a bespoke service. By definition, you're buying a scalable solution that is low cost because you buy it on standard terms. So you're not negotiating, because if you do, the price jacks up almost instantaneously. Now, certainly a much more mature thing where you're taking someone's whole email environment. Yes, you don't negotiate. You go in and you say from the get-go, we're going to offer you these protections to make them come with you. People want more than that, then the price goes up. But I think that tension between scalability, one size fits all, and then the needs to negotiate special terms is even more keener in this cloud space than in traditional sourcing. So many service providers are using non-negotiable, what we call click wrap terms. 15 years ago when I started out being a very junior lawyer, my job was to translate shrink wrap terms, as they were called in those days, which most people will probably remember, shrink wrap terms, and we were translating them from American law into English law. Because back in those days, there was just the US standard terms. They said no warranties, lots of indemnities, goodbye, forget it. And of course, that wasn't enforceable in England. And it still isn't enforceable in England, and yet a lot of the cloud vendors coming out of the States, and indeed cloud vendors just starting up here in the UK or elsewhere in Europe or India, are using these standard terms which disclaim all sorts of rights, etc. And that's just not enforceable in Europe. Not all of it. And there's risks of doing that approach. So what the more sensible cloud vendors are doing, and we've been doing it with some of them, is looking at their standard terms and saying, right, okay, in America, you disclaim all losses at all ever. If you do that in Europe, that takes your limitation of liability clause from excluding everything into excluding nothing. Because in England, if you exclude or purport to exclude death and personal injury, your whole limitation of liability clause falls, as all the lawyers in the room will know. Therefore, you go from very low limits on liability to unlimited liability by accident. And that sort of translation job is now going on. And it was great doing it as a junior lawyer, and obviously my junior lawyers and all of my colleagues here, junior lawyers, would love to do it if anyone is on the supplier side here. So the standard sort of non-negotiable terms, they will say minimum liability or no liability for service failure. They can subcontract at will, which is the point I was making about who's in your stack. The vendor can change, terminate the service. Again, that's been discussed quite a lot today. And they give very limited rights on exit. Again, something that's been discussed today. These kind of points are standard terms. 2 questions then you should ask yourself when you're going in to negotiate. The vendor saying, if you negotiate, it jacks up the price. If you're a customer, you say, well, it's all very well you saying that, but if we don't negotiate it, you're signing something that is unenforceable in England. Therefore, it's in your interest to negotiate it without jacking up the price, because your service currently, on your standard terms, you wouldn't be able to protect yourself if we did sue you. But we don't want to rely on that chance of being able to sue you on unenforceable terms. We'd much rather agree proper terms with you. So that's kind of a thing that is beginning to happen. As the market matures, as the vendor community matures, as the user community gets more experienced, we're getting a bit wiser about what we're doing. And no legal talk is complete without a Latin adage. Caveat emptor is my adage of choice, which is buyer beware. And I think buyer beware very much so in cloud, but also I think seller beware, because of these these points. There are limitations, as I've just said, to this one-size-fits-all approach. And so this movement of click wrap terms to be more localised, that by the end of shrink wrap, before probably the driver for click wrap coming in, was that you had huge booklets of shrink wrap terms, depending which country you were in. You know, you'd leaf through to find what applied in England and what applied in Scotland and what applied in Northern Ireland and let alone all around Europe. So that thing is happening. And also, mostly we've been talking B2B here, but in B2C transactions, there's a wealth of consumer protection law in Europe and in the UK, therefore, which the most sort of important one of which really is that if for web services, the consumer's law is effectively deemed to apply, whatever you say in your contract. It's not only deemed to apply in terms of looking at the regulations, but it actually applies to the contract. And in some countries, you actually have to write the contract in the consumer's language. So in France, you have to write a consumer contract in French, which, how does that work with your scalable one-size-fits-all model? With great difficulty. Now, most of the consumer sites that offer cloud services, be it Flickr, be it PayPal, be it Facebook, they're so big now, they are doing that. They're doing it properly because they can afford to do it properly. But for the startups offering B2C services, it's quite a tricky thing to think about. You're offering services to the world, but you're exposing yourself potentially. But I think Mark made a very good point, is you take a view. And the businesses take a view as to, okay, I could get sued in France, and because my terms aren't in French, I could be in trouble. But I've got no assets in France. You know, I'm a startup. I'll take the risk. Who's going to sue me? If it works, right, 3-year business plan, start writing terms in French. Great. You know, that's an approach to that risk. But be aware. I think it's important to be aware of these risks. And that last point there, I made that on the previous slide about you can go from no liability to unlimited liability. It's the law of unintended consequences. So, just a quick aside. You know, we had this all at the turn of the century when the dot-com boom was happening. It's like, oh no, it's all in the web. There's none of this regulation. It's all free and easy. No, not true. The old world laws apply. I think everyone knows that. With cloud, you're getting that again in some people saying, oh, you know, it's all free and easy. No, it's not free and easy. If anything, it's more complicated. And I won't go into all the jurisdictional and data stuff we've been through. But you know, since 2001, it's established. You know, someone was selling Nazi memorabilia in France. That's illegal. They got nailed. They were saying, but I'm selling it in America. You're selling it to the world. And in selling it to the world, you're selling it to France, which means you've broken French law. And because you're Yahoo, you do care about what's happening in France. And that was that case. And ever since then, there's never been any debate about the point that you need to be aware of local laws, then take a view. Don't think it doesn't affect me. So just consider all the principles you'd apply in any contractual context. And of course, then you have to think about all the local laws, be it privacy, be it censorship, be it tax, etc., etc. But again, as the customer, and I think most people here are customers, with obviously notable exceptions of the sponsors of today, as a customer of these services, is less your problem than it is the supplier, because they're the ones who will have the standard terms and they might get nailed on them. So let's go back and look at the essential features of technology contracts. My view is that these contracts that we're not really negotiating are the same as the contracts that some of us have been negotiating for 10 years around sourcing and procuring other forms of technology. They're the same features. There's a right to use the stuff, the license. There's, or license with an S as our American cousins write it. There's the meat of the deal. Price, scope, service levels, what you're getting and how much you're paying for it and how good it is, which is the essentials of the deal. There's risk management, privacy, security, access, and audit was being discussed earlier. There's risk allocation, the liability clauses, warranties, indemnities, and then there's the future, termination and exit. And one thing that's not on there, which has been discussed quite a lot today, is change control, or lack of change control. The right to change things willy-nilly, you know, being aware of that, the future, and then all the boilerplate stuff, including jurisdiction, which has been pointed out today, tends to be a US state in most of these cloud deals. My colleague Christopher Millard has carried out a survey of 31 cloud vendors, and he found 15 had US states. 1 had Scotland, about 10 had England, and then the rest was a random selection of European countries. And it's quite interesting, the ones who had England tended to be US vendors who'd gone, no, we're in Europe now, we better choose a local jurisdiction, where do we feel most comfortable with? Well, it's in English, so we'll go for England, which is great news for English lawyers. So they remain the same in the cloud, all these things remain the same, but there's some points take on new importance, and data is what we've talked about today, and yes, I think data is the one, which I think Mark made the point, that all this legal stuff is kind of the same, but the data bit's really quite interesting in cloud, and he got that talk, so that's good. But I think he made some good points on it, and I don't propose to go over those again. And then the other point, which is the one I was making from the floor, is who's providing the service, and what controls do you have over subcontracting? And almost because of the data, this becomes even more important. You know, you don't care who's cleaning a data center, but you do care if that data center is completely controlled by someone different to who you're signing your contract with. You need to understand how that works. So the features of cloud contracts that we are beginning to negotiate are similar to all technology contracts ever, but their appearance differs and some of the terms differ. And so the first thing is what are you signing, or what are you clicking on? And it's not just a contract, you know, that thick that some of the sourcing lawyers in the room are used to. It's the terms of service, and then the terms and conditions, and then there'll be an SLA, and then there'll be a privacy policy, which is supposed to protect you, and then there'll be an acceptable use policy, which is supposed to protect the supplier. And you'll click on them all. And I'm a lawyer, I don't read these terms when I click on them. Facebook, I read my privacy settings, because I care about that. But the other stuff, I don't read it, I don't care about it. And there's a danger, corporates, they don't care about it, they sign it. It's 5 grand, 10 grand, 20 grand. It goes under the radar in a big corporate organisation. And because it's dotted around, which is partly just the way technologists think, yeah, privacy's there, acceptable use is there, T's and C's is there, SLA's there. It's partly sometimes lawyers being a little bit clever, because they'll read the T's and C's, which is, I think, the point you were making about how there's contradictions in the terms. So lawyers will read the T's and C's, all the lawyers will get sent the T's and C's, but they won't get sent the rest of it. So they'll go, oh, the T's and C's look all right. Meanwhile, over there on the SLA, you've had the rug pulled out from your deal. You know, oh, well, brilliant. £2 million limitation liability cap. And the SLA says, we never have liability to you ever. You know, where do you stand? And so it's about being aware of what is the contract and reading it all, and to the extent you're able, negotiating it all, or negotiating the salient points. So, as we've all said today, one size fits all drives the lower price, but means a different allocation of risk from the more traditional outsourcing deal. And this price scope service level triangle is a bit like, you know, a balloon. When you push it down, another bit pops up. You know, and you've got the sort of the standard service offering. As soon as if you hammer down on the service level, the price will go up. If you negotiate the price down, then the service level will get weaker. You know, and it's being aware of that, and that's really where I think there's less room to negotiate, because it is a standard service. But you need to be aware of what you're signing up to, and you need to make your vendor aware if you think your vendor is really selling something that doesn't work in Europe, because you might then have an opportunity to get better terms without increasing your price, because they'll go, actually, for every single one of our customers, we have to take a different approach. Therefore, the cloud, the dynamics of cloud, the scalability of cloud will continue to work. But on that SLA point, it's quite interesting. Often it's called a service level agreement, but actually it's a disclaimer of service level agreement. And increasingly you look at them, you know, the service will be provided as is. You know, you get what we give you. We can turn it off whenever we want. Now, the sales guys, with all due respect, say, look, reputationally we can't do that, but you know, if we do it for you, for everyone, and we get sued, we're toast. And there is actually, I have to say, I have a lot of sympathy with that. If you're paying, I think as you said, £1,000 a month for something, it's probably fair enough for them to say, you get what you're given, but rest assured, we've got a great track record of delivering and we'll continue to deliver. You take a view, but I think you need to take an informed view, and depending what industry you're in, you might have to say, actually, that doesn't work for me. So, for example, if you are in financial services and are regulated by the FSA requires